Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Lucas Ryan moved to the edge of Oak Ridge for peace and solitude, he never expected a power-hungry HOA queen on an ATV to declare war over a backyard trail. What began with a polite hello turned into sabotage, lawsuits, electric fences, and the most legendary downfall the neighborhood ever saw. Lucas Ryan had always dreamed of peace. After 2 decades of engineering under relentless deadlines and artificial lights, he cashed in his savings and bought a 10-acre slice of serenity at the edge of a sleepy Missouri township. The land was raw but beautiful, rolling fields, a patch of forest, and a gentle creek winding along the back. There were no fences, no nosy neighbors, and most importantly, no homeowners association to nitpick the color of his shutters. Lucas built his house from the ground up, blending modern design with rustic charm, and moved in with a sense of satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. The quiet was golden. That quiet was shattered precisely 1 week after he moved in. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm and humming with the chirps of crickets, when he heard the distant growl of an engine. Seconds later, an ATV came ripping down the hill behind his house, tearing straight through the soft earth of what he considered his private backyard. The rider skidded to a dusty stop right by his garden shed. She wore oversized sunglasses, a white quilted vest with an embroidered Oak Ridge HOA logo, and a helmet that she removed with a dramatic flair. "Hello there," she chirped, climbing off the ATV like she owned the place. "You must be the new neighbor." Lucas approached, cautious. "Yeah, I just moved in last week. Can I help you with something?" "Oh, not help," she replied, waving a hand dismissively. "I'm Karen Wallace, president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. I'm here to talk to you about the path." Lucas blinked. "The what now?" Karen gestured toward the worn dirt track behind his property, the same one her ATV had just abused. "That path's been used for years by our community. Walkers, joggers, kids on bikes. Some of us ride through to the creek on weekends. It's sort of a shared tradition." Lucas folded his arms. "That land belongs to me. It's private property." "Well, yes, legally," she chuckled, as if brushing off a child's protest. "But we were hoping you'd be reasonable and keep the path open. Actually, we were going to invite you to formally join the HOA. That way, you'll have voting rights and, of course, the obligation to preserve common spaces like the trail." Lucas stared. "You want me to join your HOA and donate part of my land to the neighborhood?" Karen nodded enthusiastically. "Think of it as a contribution to the community spirit." Lucas's voice dropped a degree. "I moved here because I didn't want an HOA. This land is mine. That trail isn't public, and it never was. You're trespassing." Karen's smile faded, but only slightly. "Mr. Ryan, I think you're making a mistake. This neighborhood thrives on cooperation. We expect a certain attitude." Lucas turned and pointed to the newly posted sign near the trees. "Private property. Trespassers will be composted. Not subtle, but effective. I won't be joining your HOA. And if I see anyone else riding through my land, there'll be consequences." Karen's mouth twisted. "We'll see about that." She revved the ATV and sped off, tires ripping up more of his soil. But Lucas had already made a mental note. This woman is going to be a problem. The following week brought a series of subtle and not-so-subtle escalations that made it clear Karen Wallace had taken Lucas's refusal as a personal declaration of war. It began innocently enough. A group of children wandered across the edge of his land, kicking up dust and dragging sticks, followed by a woman with a clipboard who pretended not to notice Lucas watching from his porch. Then came a neatly folded envelope, slipped under his gate, embossed with the HOA's gold leaf crest. Inside was a letter that read, like a mafia threat, dressed in legalese. "Dear resident, in light of your recent arrival, we kindly urge you to reconsider membership with the Oak Ridge HOA. Continued refusal to align with neighborhood expectations may result in community discomfort, liability concerns, and unnecessary legal entanglements." It ended with a smiley face stamp. Lucas nearly laughed, but things got less funny as days passed. Karen resumed riding her ATV straight through his backyard trail, now more deliberately than ever, sometimes twice in one morning. She'd slow down, wave condescendingly if Lucas was outside, then roar away with her scarf trailing behind like a war banner. The trail, already faded from time, became a churned-up scar across his property. One afternoon, she even had the nerve to tow a little trailer behind her, carrying her 2 golden retrievers and a cooler labeled HOA Picnic Creek Access. Lucas installed no trespassing signs every 20 feet along the path. The next day, someone plastered them with neon pink sticky notes that read, "Community First" and "Sharing is Caring." He suspected HOA members or Karen's minions were involved, though he hadn't seen them in the act. Then came the false debt notice. A new envelope arrived, citing retroactive usage fees for HOA shared infrastructure. According to Karen's math, Lucas now owed $1,240 for maintenance of the historic community trail system, despite never agreeing to use it. The document came complete with a forged HOA map that had mysteriously extended Oak Ridge's boundaries a few dozen feet past reality, right onto Lucas's land. Not one to play victim, Lucas responded by printing out an oversized satellite map of his parcel, circled it in red marker, labeled it not HOA, laminated it, and nailed it to a stake by the entrance to the trail. Beneath it, he added a note. "This land is not a democracy. It's privately owned. Access denied." Karen responded in kind, organizing a Walk for Tradition parade. Roughly 30 HOA residents, led by Karen holding a banner that read, "Restore the Path," marched along the edge of his fence, chanting watered-down slogans like "Trails, not walls" and "One community under HOA." Someone handed Lucas a flyer that read, "Friendly reminder, you're not better than us." Lucas shook his head and went inside. The absurdity was becoming weaponized, but it wasn't until he heard Karen mutter the word legal action during one of her loud phone calls near the border of his property that he realized she wasn't going to stop. She wasn't just being nosy, she was trying to break him. That's when he started planning his next move: surveillance. Because with people like Karen, it wasn't a matter of if they'd cross the line again. It was when. Lucas wasn't a man easily rattled. Years of project management had taught him patience, strategy, and most importantly, how to play the long game. And now it seemed suburban warfare required all three. After the HOA parade stunt and the fake invoices, he knew Karen wasn't just posturing. She was testing him, escalating, seeing how far she could push. But what she hadn't anticipated was that Lucas wasn't just stubborn. He was clever. The first step was upgrading security. Lucas installed a network of motion-activated cameras around his property. One camouflaged in an old birdhouse near the trail, another behind a tree facing the ATV track, and a third cleverly embedded inside a decorative lawn owl. To deter night visitors, he rigged motion lights that flared on with theatrical brightness, illuminating any trespasser like a criminal caught mid-heist. He even added a sign that read, "Smile for the HOA History Archives." Next came the psychological counterattacks, quiet, lawful, but impossible to ignore. Every time Karen revved her ATV onto his land, a new song would blare from the strategically hidden outdoor speakers. Selections ranged from Highway to Hell to Don't Stand So Close to Me. The speakers were motion-activated too. The first time it happened, Karen nearly drove into her own dog in surprise. The second time, she screamed something unintelligible and shook her fist toward the trees. Then Lucas started trolling her with paperwork. He sent a formal cease and desist letter citing local trespassing laws, attaching a highlighted map from the county land records office, clearly showing his property's boundaries. He emailed it to her, CCing the HOA board, local police, and, just for flair, the county zoning department. The response was silence, but not for long. 2 days later, HOA members appeared again, this time under the guise of Trail Cleanup Day. Armed with trash grabbers and fluorescent vests, they approached Lucas's backyard like explorers entering forbidden territory. Karen trailed behind them on her ATV like a parade marshal. Lucas opened his back door and called out cheerfully, "Be sure to clean up the lawsuit you're walking into." Karen dismounted and stomped toward the edge of his property line. "This is a community action," she snapped. "You can't stop us from caring for the land." "It's my land," Lucas replied, "and if you care for it so much, try mowing my lawn next time." She turned beet red and stormed off. That night, Lucas found a rock in his mailbox with a note rubber banded to it. "You don't belong here." He laughed, pocketed the rock, and wrote on the note, "Thanks for the free landscaping materials." Karen's tactics turned increasingly erratic. She launched a neighborhood Facebook group where she publicly complained about uncooperative residents blocking legacy access. Lucas joined the group under an alias, Randy Trailsman, and began posting sarcastic tips like how to respect boundaries, a one-step guide, and what to do when your ATV doesn't belong to you or the terrain. The group slowly turned on Karen. Comments shifted. "I thought the guy just wanted privacy," one said. "Why don't we just leave him alone?" said another. Karen, undeterred, doubled down, claiming Lucas was installing military-grade surveillance and spreading rumors that he was plotting to sue the entire HOA. Lucas didn't need to sue, not yet. He just needed her to cross the line on camera. And Karen, as he expected, couldn't resist. That Friday night, she marched across the edge of his property under the cover of dusk and peeled off one of his posted "no trespassing" signs, shoving it into her tote bag like a prize. The motion camera recorded the whole thing. Lucas downloaded the footage, zoomed in on her smug expression, and paused it with her eyes mid-squint. He smiled. Checkmate was near. All he needed now was one good storm to tip her off the edge. And it was coming. The night was still and unusually warm for October. Lucas sat on his porch with a mug of coffee and a sense of cautious satisfaction. The day had been quiet. Too quiet, perhaps, but he took the reprieve as a small victory. His cameras were fully operational. The newly reinforced fence, complete with a low-voltage, solar-powered electric deterrent, stood tall, and the land finally felt like it belonged to him again. Maybe, just maybe, Karen had run out of steam. But peace, he would learn, has a very short lifespan when you're dealing with someone like Karen Wallace. The chaos greeted him at sunrise. Lucas stepped outside, expecting dew and birdsong. Instead, his boots crunched onto something splintered. Wood. His eyes followed a trail of debris, broken fence panels, muddy ATV tracks torn into the grass, one of his cameras dangling from its housing like a broken tooth. His heart dropped into his stomach. Then he saw the scorch marks on the fence's edge, evidence of a failed midnight rebellion. And just past the compost heap, half buried in mulch and half tangled in chicken wire, sat an unmistakable item. A white quilted vest with the Oak Ridge HOA logo stained with dirt and something suspiciously resembling egg yolk. He blinked, stunned for a moment, as the pieces clicked together. Karen had finally snapped. Rushing inside, Lucas loaded the footage from his cameras. Some were intact, and the best angle came from the lawn owl cam. There, in glorious night vision, was the whole pathetic show. The video began with Karen and her ever-submissive husband, Hal, sneaking toward the new fence with what looked like bolt cutters, wearing matching dark hoodies and camo pants like they were on some kind of suburban SWAT mission. Hal struggled with the cutters while Karen whispered directions like a low-budget heist movie villain. Then it happened. Hal made contact with the electrified wire. A loud crack, followed by Hal letting out a squeal that could have passed for a startled squirrel. He stumbled back, slipped in the wet grass, and landed squarely in the compost pile. Karen rushed to help but tripped over the tool bag, launching herself into the mud face first. She scrambled upright, vest sagging, hair stuck to her face like overcooked noodles, and let out a high-pitched scream, not of pain, but pure, frustrated humiliation. Lucas rewound the footage 3 times, each time with less disbelief and more amusement. By the 4th viewing, he was laughing out loud, but the laughter gave way to something colder. Anger. This wasn't just a prank. This was destruction of property, trespassing, and a clear act of escalation. She had crossed the final line. Lucas took a deep breath, steadied his hands, and began documenting the damage. He photographed everything. Fence, tracks, broken signs, the trampled garden bed, and, of course, the abandoned HOA vest. He zipped all the footage into a folder, titled it The Wallace Chronicles, and made 2 backup copies. He didn't wait. He didn't hesitate. By noon, he was at the county courthouse filing charges. The clerk looked mildly alarmed as Lucas calmly presented a USB drive and a stack of photos, accompanied by a concise, well-prepared statement. "I'm pressing charges for trespassing, property destruction, attempted sabotage, and harassment," he said. "The evidence is clear, and I'm done waiting." Walking out of that courthouse, Lucas felt something he hadn't in weeks. Total clarity. This wasn't just about a fence or a trail or an ATV. This was about ownership, about boundaries, both legal and personal. Karen had treated his property like a community toy box. Now she'd be treated like what she had become, a lawbreaker in a pearl necklace. Lucas stood on his porch that evening, sipping tea instead of coffee, watching the repaired section of his fence in the soft golden light. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, subpoenas, and noise. But tonight, for the first time, his land was quiet, and it was his. The courthouse buzzed like a beehive when Lucas arrived. Local gossip had done its work. Half the HOA board was in attendance, along with a handful of curious residents who treated the hearing like a matinee performance. Lucas walked in wearing a clean collared shirt, jeans, and calm resolve. In one hand, he carried a black folder labeled Evidence. In the other, a USB drive. His shoulders were relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. He wasn't angry anymore. He was focused. Karen Wallace entered like suburban royalty descending a staircase. Hair curled, makeup perfect, pearl necklace shining under the fluorescent lights. She wore a blazer 2 sizes too authoritative and carried a stack of color-coded notes, as if she were presenting a TED Talk on community enforcement excellence. Her husband, Hal, trailed behind like a half-deflated balloon. Karen nodded politely at Lucas across the aisle, her lips curled into a smile of mock sympathy, like she was about to teach a misbehaving child a lesson. Lucas didn't respond. He just calmly took his seat next to his attorney, a sharp-eyed, silver-haired woman named Cheryl DeWitt. When the judge, a gruff man with a booming voice named Honorable Thomas Greaves, entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone sat a little straighter. The air grew heavier. War was about to begin. Lucas was the plaintiff, and he was called to the stand first. His attorney guided him through the facts, laying a careful foundation. Legal property boundaries, the original deed, the history of trespassing, the installed surveillance, and the escalation that culminated in the destruction of his fence. Then came the evidence. Cheryl inserted the USB, and the room went dark. The footage played on the courtroom monitor. Gasps echoed around the room as Karen and Hal appeared on screen, clumsily sneaking through the night, bolt cutters in hand. When Hal screamed and collapsed into the compost pile, several people snorted involuntarily. Karen's slip into the mud triggered a full-blown laugh from the back row. Even the court stenographer paused her typing to catch her breath. Karen's face blanched, as if all the blood in her body had retreated to her shoes. Hal slid slightly lower in his seat. Lucas sat quietly, watching. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, but he felt it. Justice was catching up. The weight of weeks of frustration began to lift, replaced by something steadier. Vindication. Then it was Karen's turn. She rose with theatrical elegance, flipping open her notes. "Your Honor," she began, voice honeyed but trembling beneath the surface. "The trail in question has been used by the community for over 2 decades. My husband and I, along with other neighbors, merely sought to preserve tradition and promote togetherness. Mr. Ryan's aggressive fencing, signage, and use of electric deterrents are extreme responses to what was once a peaceful arrangement." The judge held up a hand. "Mrs. Wallace, are you suggesting that trespassing, documented on video, was done in the spirit of community outreach?" Karen hesitated. "Well, it wasn't malicious, Your Honor. The electric charge was unexpected and—" "Let me clarify," Judge Greaves interrupted. "You unlawfully entered private property in the middle of the night, destroyed part of a fence, and sustained a minor electric shock due to your own unlawful conduct. Then you left the scene." Karen blinked. "Yes, but—" "Mrs. Wallace," the judge leaned forward, "you are not the victim here. Mr. Ryan has provided extensive evidence of harassment, property damage, and targeted intimidation under the guise of HOA enforcement. Let me remind you, his property is not, and has never been, under the jurisdiction of your association." Karen swallowed hard. Her voice shrank. "But the community—" "The community," the judge thundered, "is not a legal entity that overrides individual property rights." At that moment, the room felt as still as a church. Lucas exhaled quietly. A strange calm washed over him, not the fire of triumph, but the deep relief of knowing he didn't have to fight anymore. The burden was lifting, and it was being taken away by the gavel. The judge turned to the record. Based on the overwhelming evidence, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Lucas Ryan. The defendant, Karen Wallace, is ordered to pay restitution for the destruction of property, legal fees, and damages in the amount of $47,500. Additionally, a permanent no contact and no trespass order will be issued effective immediately. Karen didn't move. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. And then, without warning, she bolted. With a wild, impulsive cry, she grabbed her HOA binder and hurled it across the courtroom like a frisbee. It smacked the floor with a pathetic thud. Gasps filled the air. Her heels clicked furiously as she tried to exit the courtroom, only to slip on a dropped file folder near the aisle, tumbling unceremoniously to the ground in a flailing sprawl. Hal rushed to help her, but she shoved him away, screeching, "Don't touch me, Hal! You were supposed to cut the fence faster." The judge rubbed his temples, muttering, "This is why I wanted to retire 5 years ago." Security escorted Karen from the courtroom. Her hair was matted to one side, mascara streaked, blouse untucked, the elegant veneer shattered beyond repair. Lucas remained in his seat, still. A hint of disbelief lingered in his chest, but it was overtaken by a warm, quiet pride. It was done. Truly done. Outside the courthouse, as he stepped into the bright sun, Cheryl turned to him and smiled. "That," she said, "was a glorious flaming crash." Lucas chuckled. "And it only cost me a fence, a security system, and my last shred of patience." "But you won." Lucas looked back at the doors as they closed behind him. "Yes," he said, "I did." In the days following the trial, the shockwaves of Karen Wallace's courtroom implosion spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire. Her dramatic fall from grace became neighborhood folklore almost overnight. A blurry photo of her flinging the HOA binder across the courtroom was posted anonymously on the local Facebook group, quickly captioned, "The Flight of the Queen." Memes followed. Even the teens who once avoided HOA meetings were suddenly quoting her courtroom shriek, "You were supposed to cut the fence faster." Like it was a line from a cult classic, Karen officially resigned from her role as HOA president 2 days later, citing unfair bias and a lack of appreciation for visionary leadership. Her resignation letter, riddled with passive-aggressive jabs, was read aloud at the emergency HOA meeting. No one objected. In fact, the room broke into spontaneous applause when her nameplate was ceremoniously removed from the table and replaced by a simple piece of cardstock that read, "Acting President, Mabel Grandma May Hartley." May had lived in Oak Ridge for 42 years and had spent most of them quietly tending to her rose garden, baking peach cobblers, and feeding the stray cats of the neighborhood. She was beloved and unshakably neutral. Her first act as interim president, shutting down all open HOA trail access claims, disbanding the enforcement subcommittee Karen had formed, and publicly stating, "We're going back to being neighbors, not narcs." The room burst into cheers. May just smiled, modest and warm, then offered everyone cookies. Under her leadership, the HOA softened. Meetings included potlucks instead of agendas. Fines were reviewed, then in most cases forgiven. She launched a community volunteer group to help elderly residents with home maintenance, and she even reached out to Lucas with an olive branch, literally in the form of a homemade olive loaf. As for Karen, she disappeared for a time. Some said she'd gone to stay with her sister in Arizona. Others claimed she was attending a personal leadership retreat in Colorado. Rumors flew, none confirmed, but the Wallace house went quiet. Hal, now seen walking the dog alone, avoided eye contact with most neighbors. The HOA quietly revoked Karen's honorary titles. Even her favorite bench at the community park was quietly repainted and renamed the Peace Seat. Lucas, meanwhile, became something of a legend. At first, neighbors approached cautiously, unsure whether he harbored resentment or wanted to be left alone. But Lucas was gracious. He joined one of May's potluck nights, bringing a rhubarb pie and a laminated copy of the property map, just for laughs. The room howled when he joked, "Don't worry, this one's non-electrified." Soon, people were asking for advice. How to install cameras, how to read county plats, even how to bake that pie. Kids asked if they could pet his dog. Neighbors waved without awkwardness. And more than once, he returned home to find a basket of muffins on his porch with thank you notes like, "You helped us breathe again." Lucas took it all in stride. He rebuilt the damaged part of the fence, this time without electricity, and opened a new walking path around his property. A proper one, marked and mulched, with signs that read, "With permission, not assumption." It was a hit. Even May brought her grandkids down to walk it. He didn't erase the past. One section of the trail still had a wooden post where the infamous vest had once been found. Lucas mounted a small plaque there. It read simply, "Here lies the last stand of HOA imperialism. May it rest in compost." And on the one-year anniversary of the courtroom verdict, the community threw a block party in Lucas's honor. There were cupcakes, music, and a watermelon eating contest. Lucas didn't say much, but when May handed him a homemade cherry pie and said, "For being the fence we all needed," he gave her a rare, full smile. That evening, sitting on his porch with a slice of that pie and his dog dozing at his feet, Lucas watched the sun dip behind the trees. The land was peaceful. His land. No engines, no shouting, just wind and warmth. He raised his fork to the air, quietly toasting. To freedom, fences, and finally, pie. Spring returned to Oak Ridge with warmth in the air and laughter in the streets. The lawns bloomed, kids raced on scooters, and the sound of neighborly chatter drifted between porches like birdsong. But on the far edge of the neighborhood, tucked against the tree line, stood one house that had come to symbolize more than just private property. It stood for boundaries, respect, and a stubborn kind of justice. Lucas Ryan leaned against his rebuilt gate, sipping from a mason jar of sweet tea as the town's new walking trail wound gently past his land. The same trail Karen once demanded as her community right, now coiled politely around his property, a daily reminder of the battle that changed everything. On its entrance sign in Grandma May's careful handwriting, someone had added, "Respect is the only true path." Across the fence, a group of kids giggled near a wooden statue Lucas had installed, a full-sized sculpture of a compost bin with a tiny bronze ATV lodged in its side. A small plaque beneath it read, "Let it rot." Every visitor who saw it chuckled. The locals now used "pulling a Karen" as shorthand for making a spectacular, self-sabotaging power grab. Karen herself had not returned. Her house sold quietly to a young couple who, according to rumor, asked at closing, "There isn't an electric fence situation here, is there?" As the sun began to set in a watercolor sky, Grandma May arrived at Lucas's gate carrying a foil-covered tray. "Peach cobbler," she grinned. "Still warm. I figured you might be out here, thinking like a philosopher." Lucas laughed. "I've been thinking about putting a guest book next to the fence. Something like, 'Please sign if you came without bolt cutters.'" May rolled her eyes and handed him the tray. "Just don't electrify the guest book." They stood in silence for a few moments, watching the pink-orange light spread over the yard. Then, from somewhere distant, deep in the woods, they heard it, the faint, unmistakable whine of an ATV engine. Lucas froze. May raised an eyebrow. Then came the sound of a sputter, a clunk, and what could only be described as a splash. Silence. May grinned. "Guess even ghosts of bad decisions can't outrun a muddy creek." Lucas chuckled, taking a bite of cobbler. Poetic justice. And with that, the final ghost of the HOA war slipped beneath the trees, forgotten, forgiven, and possibly still stuck in the mud. The air was peaceful again, and this time it was going to stay that way.